But the only issue there now is
Okay.
This is just a guideline.
Yeah, it's just a
You
guideline.
don't have to
It's
think
just a
about
guideline.
it.
just a
Okay.
And
So-
besides, this same thing, I got a grant of it.
I'm
That's
supposed to
like-
say it.
That's
So, good evening, everyone. We are going to be starting the class now. So, just like I have said, it's just like we are learning it together, right? And we are going to be starting from the absolute basis, like trying to understand the purpose of
Man,
the web development, right? So I hope everyone can hear me. Let me confirm that while we start.
Sorry to say that, bro, but I've learned a lot.
So I'm expecting a response. Can everyone hear me? Oh, it looks like my okay. I think everyone can hear me now. So web development. So I'm using VS Code. So firstly, how am I going to start? So I'm just going to, let's say that I want to create the website. Now let's firstly understand Pato.
Hey, Jesus, wahala.
Okay, so firstly, let's try to understand the way the internet works, right? So when we talk about the internet, so the internet is just basically some set of computer. So it's just the same way you have files on your system and you can access it wherever you like. So when we have access, files from that other system also. So that's simply what the internet is all about. So when you have another system that you can typically query to get data or files from, so that system is usually called the server, right? And we have server in different places. Basically we have it in different places, or the place that are called the data centers. So when you're not talking about when you're browsing a particular web page, so what it typically does is that you make use of your browser. So let us look at something. Let's say that I want to browse a site, let's say paystack.com, for example. So when I put this paystack.com, so actually a lot of things happen here, but they are abstracted away from us by the browser. So we don't really know most of those things that happens in the hood. So the first thing is that, okay, we have this paystack.com, which is called the domain name. So typically, the internet, it actually doesn't understand all these domain names, right? So what the internet knows is the IP address. Okay. Let me leave Pato. Sorry, I'm coming. Let me change my location.
This your charger, they flash charge my power bank. How much you buy them?
Why you saying that? That's what you said.
So
I know that. Musa no get
sorry, I'm trying to set up where I am. Okay, so can you all hear me now? Thank you. Hello? Okay, thank you. So when you have a server, so I've talked about server, right? So a server is just typically another system, like just like you have a system on your computer. Your computer itself is a system. So if another computer can like make request from your system, and your system is going to send back another file to it, then your system in that case is going to be the server, while the other one is going to be the receiver. So when you now talk about what web development, so I'm talking about the domain name, right? So this domain name now, it's going to be resolved into an IP address, and that IP address is typically used to what it is mapped to a particular storage in the server. So when it is mapped to a server, then a particular file is queried. So that file that is now queried, it is now sent back to your own system. So this file that is now sent back to us, now there is now a particular language that our browsers understand. There is a language that our browsers understand. So that language is what we call the HTML, or the hypertext markup language. What do I call it? Sorry, I would love it to know that everyone is flowing with me, so I might be asking those questions. So it is called the hypertext markup language. I understand that we all know it. Okay, let me just put this as big 0, and in this place, let me just say so we have what we call the HTML, which is typically what hypertext markup language. Now, when we talk about hypertext, it means something that is beyond text, right? Markup simply means, we have what we call markup language, and we have what we call markdown language. So for example, this readme.md that I have here now, so this MD, it means markdown. So the difference between a markdown and a markup is typically that, let's say in this case now, if I want to, let's say I want to write headings 1, I can use this hash now. Whatever I write here is going to treat it as what? As headings 1. If I put 2 hash, it's going to take it as what? Headings 2. So stuff like that. So that's what hypertext markup language, and that's what markdown languages are. But when you talk about markup languages, so markup languages, they typically use what we call they use tags. So HTML, it uses tags in order to structure elements. It uses tags to structure elements. Now these tags, we now have a structure that it follows. So I'm going to let me open Figma so that I'll be able to represent and show how all of those things work. So the tags that we are now talking about, there is a way that it works. There is a way that it works. So I'm going to let me use this. Yeah, so the markup language, it uses tags, and these tags, it has something like a tree structure. it has something like a tree structure. You know, in Solidity, when we want to start our Solidity, we usually make the SPDX license identifier. That's the first thing that we usually write. So in HTML, when we want to write HTML, so let's start with creating a file. So I'm going to create a file now. So a markup language. So let's say that I'm going to write index.html. So I have index.html. So for my index.html, the first thing that I'm going to write is going to be the doc type. So you can see I have the doc type HTML. Now, what's the meaning of this? This doc type HTML, it tells the browser or whatever is going to read this that the language that is written here is HTML5. The language have what we call the HTML tag. So we now have the HTML tag. So I'm going to write it here. We have the HTML tag. So for my HTML tag, it is starting from HTML tag, a typical folder file structure. It starts from HTML file. Now this HTML tag, it now has two children. It has how many children? Two children. We have what we call the head and the body. So this HTML, it has two children, which is the head and the body. So this is the head and this is the what? The body. So they actually, when you now have inside this head, that is where most of the things that identifies, most of the things that identifies the HTML document, this is where they usually want to stay. So in this head, this is where you are going to have essentially the metadata. In this place, you are going to have the metadata, meta tags. Let's use meta tags. You are going to have the title tag, and if you have scripts, so scripts are essentially JavaScript file. So you can have them in this place. So inside the head, inside the body, that's where we now have the real. So everything that is going to be shown in the browser, anything that you are going to see in the browser is going to be shown in this body. So the different types of tags that we now have in this place, I'm now going to divide them into two. I'm now going to divide them into how many? Into two. So we have what we call the semantic tag and the non-semantic tag. We have what we call semantic tag, and we have what we call the non-semantic tag. So the semantic tags, they are the ones that they have special meaning. When you look at those tags, they have special meaning. So before we even go to the body, so let's essentially look at some things here. So in this place now, I'm going to have head, and I'm going and call it what? Fundamentals of web development. Right? So I have fundamentals of web development in this place. Now the next thing is, so I'm going to run this, and let's see what we are going to have. So when I run this, now look at what it gives me. You can see that the fundamentals of web development, which is the title that we have here, we now have it in this place, which is the title of our web page. Now if you should look at the web page, currently it is blank web page. Now if you should look at the web page, currently it is blank, which means that we don't have anything on it. So anything that is going to be displayed on the web page, there are things that are essentially going to be in this body, right? So I'm now saying that in this body, the various tags that we can have here, they are categorized into two. We have what we call the semantic tags and the non-semantic tags. So for the semantic tags, right? So what are the semantic tags? The semantic tags, that they are the ones that they have special meaning. The semantic tags, they have special meaning. So examples, if you have h1 to h6. So h1 to h6, they typically represent what? The headings. So headings 1, headings 2, headings 3, headings 4, headings 5, headings 6. So that's what they mean. So we have P, which represents paragraph. We have section. We have main. We have aside. We have image. We have image. We have video. We have audio. So all of these are semantic tags. Why? Because they have meaning. So whenever you use them, they have a special meaning to them. So we also have button in this place, in this category also. So in this other category here, so this is where we have, let me call it here, when you have div. So div, it represents division, or you call it container. So when you have that, it is not semantic. That is, you can define it anyhow that you like. You can essentially define it anyhow that you like. Now, so let us now look at, if you want to write text in this place, so you can simply wrap the text around a tag. So let us look at our h1 tag first. So this is the headings one. Now I'm going to write this is a web development class. So let's look at what we have. So you can see that we have, this is an h1, this is from an h1 tag. So I'm going to put h1 here, so we can see that, okay, this is from an h1 tag, and we used it to write this is a web development class. Now we can also have h2 tag, right? So now this is an h2 tag. So let me use h3 also. This is an h3 tag. So now let us now look at something. If you look at the three tags that we have h1, h2, and h3. You'll see that even though the three of them are texts, they are rendered differently, in the sense that their sizes are different. So why do we have this? Now, I have said it earlier that when you have a semantic tag, it means that they have special meaning. They have a specific meaning. So the fact that they have specific meaning, it means that the browser itself, it also have a predefined meaning, like it also have a predefined styles for them. So which means that this style that we are having here, it is due to the fact that we are using a browser to view it. So the browser is rendering it this way. It is the browser that is rendering it this way. So, and you see that h1 is always bigger in size than h2. It's always bigger in size than h3, like that. Till you get to so let me say this is h4. So then we have h5. Then we have h6. So this is h6. So you can see that h6 is actually very small here, right? Then we also have the p tag. So we say that this is a paragraph. So let's look at the way it is rendered. So we can see that this is a paragraph. So now, so this is just the way, you markup languages are written. So if you now look at all of them, you'd see that we have each of the tags. We have what we call the opening and the closing tag. If you look at the way it is written, look at the way this body is written, you see that we have the opening, the body, it has the opening tag, which is something like this, and it has the closing tag. This is how the closing tag is. So now, if you now look at different websites, you realize that there is more to website than just writing all these things that we have in this place. Like, there is actually a lot of things that actually goes on in a modern website. Let us look at this paste tag that we opened earlier. So if you should look at this one now, you can see that there are actually a lot of features. So now the question is, now how can we move from writing this to coming to this place? So there are still some things that we need to talk about. Now, when we have tags can also have what we call attributes and values. So, and that's normal thing about tags in HTML. So tags can have attributes and value. So this H1, for example, we can give it an attribute of color and give it a value of, let's say, red. So when we do that, let's see what happens. Okay. Okay, I think we have style, color, red. Yeah. So this should work. Yeah. So this H1 tag, we can have this style here is an attribute that we are applying to this H1 tag, and we are giving it a value of color red. So now, because I don't want us to make this thing to feel so clumsy, so the purpose of HTML is just to structure. The purpose of HTML is just to structure. The purpose of HTML is just to structure. Now, we now have another thing which we call the CSS. We have another thing which we call the what? CSS. Now, what is the meaning of CSS? CSS means cascading style sheet. CSS, it means cascading style sheet. Now, what is the meaning of cascading? What is the meaning of style sheet? So when you say that something is cascading, it means something like this. When you have a what's it called? Something like a step like this. If you have something like a step that is going downward, if you should pour water from top, if you should pour water from the top, now the water is going to essentially flow from top to bottom, right? So that is the same meaning that what cascading style sheet mean. So cascading style sheet simply means that you are applying, we've already said that our HTML, it has a tree structure which is starting from this HTML itself. So when you have this HTML as the starting of our root, or as our root, then it now flows from HTML to head and body. So from this body is going to have its children. So the children are going to be, they are going to continuously be inheriting one another that way. So this cascading style sheet, what it's now saying is that if I should apply a particular style to something, we've already said that yes, it's going to have a tree structure, something like this. It's going to have a tree structure, something like this. So let's now say that I apply something to a particular place here. If I should apply it to this plate, it's going to cascade downward. That is, whatever I apply here, anything that is here is also going to what? Is going to take it also. Anything that is here is also going to take it. However, cascading style sheet, it now uses what we call specificity. It uses specificity. So what does specificity mean? It means that if you want to, it cascades based on how specific you are while defining a particular value. So which means that if you have a particular let's say object or a particular node, when you apply different styles to it, it's going to look at the cascade value of those styles, and that's what it's going to use to render it. Now, specificity. So but before we go into that, let's look at how can we, if we want to create a CSS. So let us say that I'm going to create a CSS. I call it what? Style.css. So this style.css, now if I want to link it to this my HTML, inside in the head I'm going to use the link, and in this place I will say that it is what I have href is style.css. Then the this one is what? Style sheet, and type is text/css. So what this one is going to do is going to what? Link this style sheet to whatever I have here. So instead of putting this style in this place, I can essentially just come to this place and I can select this. So let's say that if I want to select it, I select it now, and I'm going to say that the color should be red. So I should still have the same thing. You can see I typically have the same thing here. So how does CSS work? Now, if you should look at this now, you see that CSS, it has what we call the selector, and then you now have whatever value that you want to put in this place. So this is selector, and we have 3 types of selector. So the CSS selectors that we have so the CSS selectors that we have, we have tag, we have class, and ID. So in HTML, we already know what tags are. So all of these things, this H1 here is a tag, this H2 is a tag, this H3 is a tag, H4 is a tag. So I can use it essentially. So you can see now I am selecting the H1 tag. So I can select, let's say that I can select H3 tag also, and give it a color of bisque. Let's give it this color. So you can see now that the H3 tag, it has changed. I can select H5 tag and say that the font size should be, let's say, 40 rem. Hey. Maybe that's too big. Okay, let's use 40 pixels. So you can see the H5, the size is now very big. So this is one type of what? Selector. Now another type of selector that we have is what we call class. So how do we select? How do we do? So HTML, they can have classes, right? So let's say that this one that is H1 now, I can give it a class and say that what this one, it has class of, I can give it anything, let me just call the class title class. I call the class title. Now if I want to select class in my CSS, what I'm going to use is what? Is dot and the name of the class. and I can apply whatever style that I'm going to do. So if I should put blue, I'm going to say that color should be blue. Now you would see that I've already, this my H1, previously it was red. Now I am now using what? I'm now using blue. I'm not saying that what this thing should now be blue. So we've already defined it to have a color of red before, and now we are defining it to have a color of blue. So if I should ask, although we have seen it already, which of the two is going to be the resultant color? If I should ask, is there anyone that can tell me as with the reason? Is there anyone? Like my H1 tag, this my H1 tag here. So I've already given it color of red. Then I'm now defining, I gave it a class title, and I'm saying that any element that has the class title should have a color of blue. So I'm now asking that which is going to like what's going to be the resultant, what results. What? So I'm asking, like, why would it be red? Okay. Okay. So okay. So now that's where selector specificity now comes in. That's where what? Selector specificity comes in. Let me write it here. Selector specificity. So this particular area is what it confuses people actually about selector specificity. So when we talk about selector specificity, so I've already said that we have three types of selectors here. So we have the tags, we have class, and ID. So the first thing that it does is that the number one thing that you need to realize is that yes, a particular tag can have as many classes. It can have only just one tag. Yes, it can have just one tag. So but it can have as many tags as possible, right? It can have as many classes as possible, and it can also have as many IDs as possible. So the number one rule is that what ID overrides classes. ID overrides classes. Number two is that what classes override tags. So the number one rule is that what ID overrides classes. Number two is that what classes override tags. So what we have seen here essentially is just a class overriding a tag. So whenever you have a class will always override an ID, will always override a tag. So in this place now we have a tag here which is title, we have a class which is title, and we have a tag which is H1. So the two of them, they are giving contrasting value. So it means that the class is going to override whatever you have in the tag, right? Now, I have also said that an ID will also, override a class. So let us now look at what that means. Now let us say that this h1, this h1, if you should add an ID and call the ID web, right? So if you want to select an ID, so we are going to use hash. So the name of the ID is web. So now I'm not going to give this one a color and call it what? Let me call the color purple. So if I should ask now, what's going to be the what color is this my h1 going to have now? So why? Okay. So thank you very much. So it means that the ID, this ID is going to what? Is going to override it, and you can see it here that we now have purple here, right? We now have purple here. Now there's now another thing. So in the case, what if we now have two IDs, two contrasting IDs in the same what's it called? In the same object. So what if you have two contrasting ID? What if you have more than one class? So those things also. So you can say that when you have multiple classes, when you have a particular tag that has multiple classes, the one that has the highest number of classes, the tag that has the highest number of classes is going to what? Is going to take over. So what do we mean by that? Now, we have this one. It has a class. Now, whenever we have the ID, regardless of whatever you have at the class level, the ID will always override it. So let us try to remove this, right? Now, let us now say that we have this at this class level. I'm going to have how can I? So it is possible to have more than one class here actually. So after this title, let's say that I now create. There's now another class. So we have title and we have web. So in this web, I can define another thing here and say that what for this one, the font size should be, let's say, 42 pixels. So if you should look at this now, you'd see that it has changed the font size also. But what I'm trying to, what I also want to say here is that when you have lots of classes, so the number one thing that is going to look at the ID, right? So if there are more than one ID that is giving the same rule, it's going to look at the particular ID that has the one that has the most IDs. So if it has the class level, if there is more than one class that is trying to give it a particular rule, it's going to look at the one that has the most classes. And if they all have the same, if it has the same number of classes or it has the same number of IDs and it's trying to change something, so let's take for example this color. Now I want to make this one to be this blue violet. Now you see that both of this color, it has both classes, it has both title and web. Now in this case, now you see that it is giving it blue, and the reason it is giving it blue is because this blue, it comes after this web. If I should bring this blue up, if I should bring it upward, which means that this web is now downward, look at what I have. So you need to put all of those things into consideration while writing your CSS, and that's one of the reasons why writing CSS is kind of tedious, right? Writing CSS is kind of tedious because of some of these reasons. So another thing to also note is that when you're also writing CSS, if you have an inline CSS, it will always override whatever, because this one now, it is an external CSS. So if you have an inline attribute, it will always override whatever is coming from external, and whatever is in external will always override whatever is in what is predefined by the browser. So it is when it doesn't have anything to look into in the browser and everything, that's when it's going to fall back on whatever style is given in the browser. So the next thing that I now want us to look at is what we call the box model. Or let me ask now, if you have any question. Is there any question now? Please, do you have any question as regards where we've got to before I proceed to the box model? Okay, so the box model. So what is the box model? When we talk about essentially everything that is on the web, so you are going to look at it in the aspect of a box, right? So if you should look at all the different websites, like essentially any website, so everything that you are looking at, you are going to see them as a box. So when you now see it as a box, there are now some things that you are going to note. So if you have it as a box, I won't be able to. Okay, I should be able to draw that. So if you have it as a box, this is how a box is, right? So now for these boxes, it's not going to. Now there are some things that we are now going to talk about. So there is now something we call, I'm going to write out some terms and we are going to define them. So the number one, we have, let's start with what? With outline. So then we have what we call the border. Then we now have some types of spaces. So we have what we call, we have the margin, we have padding, and we have gap. Then okay, so let's talk about all of this. So when you have a box this way, right? When you have a box this way, now the outline is just the tiny line that defines the boundary of the box. The tiny line that defines the boundary of the box, that's what we call the box model. That defines the boundary of the box. The tiny line that defines the boundary of the box is what we call the outline. So if you are looking at this one now, this shape, even though it is not perfect. So this blue thing that you have here, even though it is not perfect, let's assume that it is a rectangle. So this blue that I highlight it is more like what? The outline. Then we now have the border. So the border is it's defined by the stroke. So the border can be big. So the difference between a border and an outline is that outline is usually is essentially very small or thin, but you cannot increase or decrease the size of an outline, but you can increase or decrease the size of a border. So when you now talk about what margin, padding, and gap, so these three are types of what? Are types of white spaces. These three are types of white spaces. And what do they mean? So when you have this box model, so if you have another box, you can essentially have a box inside it. And you can also have a box outside it. So the box that you have, the distance from here to here, the distance. So we are making reference to this, to the border, to the border of this black now. We are making reference to the border of what? Of this black. This black is our reference. Do we get? You need to have a reference before you can say that something is a margin or a padding. So making reference to this border here. So from the distance from this to its container, so this yellow here is the container, is what we call what? Margin. The distance between a border, the white space between a box and its container is called what? It's called a margin. While the distance between a box and its child, you can see, we can essentially call this what? A child element. So this one is called what? Padding. So that's the difference between padding and margin that we have. So for padding, you say that a padding is the distance between what's it called? The padding is the distance between the reference box and its child, while margin is between the reference box and its what? And its parent container. So now when you now have this, yes, you can hear me now. So I'm saying that for the box model, so we are making reference to this black box. And we have this one is going to be the parent container. Let's call this one the parent container. So this one is the parent container. This yellow here is the parent container, while this red here is the what? Is the child container. So, and this black here is our reference box. This black here is our reference box. So we are now saying that a margin, what is margin? The white space. Margin is white space between what? Between parent and what? Parent and reference box. So margin is the white space between parent container and the reference box. That is margin. So padding is the white space between a child container and the reference box. Is this clear now? Okay, thank you. So then the next is what's the next? So then we now have what we call gap. We have what we call gap. Now you can see that this margin or padding, it exists between maybe parent and child, a parent and reference, or child and reference. Now this gap, it happens between siblings. It happens between siblings. So when we say something as siblings, it means that the two of them, they have the same parent. When we say that two boxes are siblings, it means that those two boxes, they have the same parent. So example of that is, I'm going to draw, let's say that this is our parent box. This is our parent box. Then we are now going to have, this is one. So this is a child. This is another child. Okay. So we have another child here. So if you should look at this now, if you should look at this now, now we can say that the white space that we have in this place, the white space that we have in this place is what we call gap. Do you get that? The white space that we have in between two siblings is what we call gap. So the white space that we have in between two siblings is what we call gap. Is that understood? Okay. So the next, so now the next thing that we are going to now do is, now let us now try to let's try to come up with a web development, like a typical web structure. So let us now come up with a typical web structure. So for a typical web structure, so let's say that we want to, let's look for a website to recreate. So it's okay, let's look at this website. I think trybrowse.com. So let's use this as our reference. So if we should look at this now, so we actually have a lot of things going on here. So let's try to analyze this first. So you can see we have this, what we have here is what we call the header. We have the header here. This is a section, which is the hero section. This is another section here. This is another section here.